Straighter carrots, cleaner potatoes, and basil that just refuses to stop growing back. More soil, more space, more room for the roots to spread. That sounds like the recipe for the best harvest of your life. Or at least that's the rule of thumb people pass along over every garden fence. But there's a whole group of plants that grow faster in a container on your balcony, look healthier, and end up yielding even more than they would in a big garden bed. In this video, we're counting down 15 vegetables that often do better in a pot than in the ground. If you garden with limited space yourself, go ahead and subscribe right here, because videos like this for balconies, patios, and container gardens land here every week. And stick around to the end, because the plant at number 1 is so perfectly made for a pot that a lot of experienced gardeners never set it in a bed again. Let's get into it. With all of these plants, the thing that really decides the harvest is control. Better drainage, better soil, fewer weeds, fewer pests, and the freedom to put a plant exactly where it needs to be. A garden bed gives you space, a container gives you command, and with a surprising number of crops, that's what makes all the difference. We are working our way up from number 15, and the advantages get clearer with every plant, right up to the herb at number 1 that hits an absolute peak in a pot. At number 15, let's start with carrots. Carrots belong deep in a classic vegetable bed, right? In reality, a container often gives you nicer carrots than garden soil ever could. The reason is the soil itself. Garden soil is full of stones, old root beds, hard clumps of clay, and compacted patches. And all of that forces a carrot to twist, split, and grow into strange shapes. That's exactly why so many homegrown carrots come out crooked and stunted. In a container, that problem disappears at once. Loose potting soil lets the root grow straight down without fighting any obstacles. And the result is smooth, even, clean carrots. Then there's the weeds. Carrot seedlings are tiny and delicate, and in a bed they're constantly competing with sprawling weeds for space and nutrients, while in a pot you keep that under control with 2 fingers. And because a container warms up faster in spring than cold garden soil, the seeds often germinate noticeably earlier. A vessel just 30 centimeters deep gives you a surprisingly big harvest in the tiniest footprint. For anyone with a balcony or a small yard, that's a real turning point. For beautiful, straight carrots, you really just need a deep pot, loose soil, and a sunny spot. Moving on to number 14, garlic. Garlic seems like a crop for big beds, but in a container it often plays its biggest advantages. Its worst enemy is too much moisture. Damp, clammy soil quickly leads to fungus and bulb rot, especially in the cold months, and a classic bed often holds far more water than garlic likes. A pot solves that almost by itself. Potting soil drains faster, dries more evenly, and puts the moisture right in your hands. That's exactly why container garlic bulbs often end up healthier than the ones from the ground. Then there's the structure. Garlic loves loose, nutrient-rich soil where the cloves can spread out freely under the surface. And in a pot, you build that perfect soil from day one. Because weeds are also easier to manage in a container, garlic faces less competition over its long growing season. You push the cloves in during autumn, water now and then, and let nature do the rest. And when the weather turns really nasty, you just slide the container to a sheltered spot and give the bulb a small edge against frost and endless rain. A fixed bed simply can't do that. At number 13 comes lettuce. A container solves one of the biggest lettuce problems there is, and that's heat. A garden bed soaks up summer warmth like a hot plate, and that's when lettuce shoots up fast and turns bitter. A pot, on the other hand, is mobile, and that changes everything. When temperatures climb, you simply slide the lettuce into partial shade during the hottest part of the day, and that little trick often extends the harvest by weeks. Then there's pest protection. Slugs and soil insects love to attack tender lettuce leaves in a bed, but a raised container makes their root much harder, which means cleaner leaves and healthier plants. And harvesting gets genuinely convenient. Instead of walking through the whole garden every day, your fresh lettuce sits right by the kitchen door. Snip a few leaves, let the rest keep growing. Done. People love exactly that kind of low-effort system. And because lettuce has shallow roots, even small containers give a decent harvest. And once one batch is finished, you refill and sow again right away, with no big soil prep. For apartment gardeners, balcony owners, and anyone short on space, container lettuce quickly becomes the easiest and most rewarding crop of the whole season. At number 12, we have radishes. Hardly any vegetable responds to a container as fast as the radish. The first reason is compacted soil. Radishes hate hard ground because firm soil slows the root and gives you small, woody bulbs, while loose potting soil lets radishes swell quickly and evenly. The second reason is warmth. A container heats up earlier in spring, which speeds up germination and growth, and that's why some gardeners harvest their pot radishes in as little as 3 to 4 weeks. Just think about that for a second. That's one of the fastest rewards gardening can hand you. And quick wins simply make you want more. Then there's the cleanliness, because you pull radishes out of a pot with ease instead of digging through heavy soil. The bulbs come up smoother and cleaner. And because weed pressure in a container is much lower, the fast-growing radish has almost no competition during its tricky early days. Even a shallow vessel carries a surprisingly big harvest, which is exactly why radishes succeed for so many beginners almost on the first try. Once you've seen how quick and easy it is in a pot, you'll barely grow them in a bed again. At number 11, things get colorful, because now come the peppers. This surprises a lot of gardeners, but pepper plants often carry more fruit in a container than in the ground. Why? Because peppers actually like a slightly restricted root space. In a huge bed, the plant sometimes puts too much energy into lush foliage instead of fruit. A pot creates just the right amount of tightness and steers that energy into the peppers rather than into sprawling leaves. Then there's the warmth peppers love above all else. A container warms up faster than garden soil, and warmer roots mean quicker growth, earlier flowering, and more yield. Especially in cooler regions, container peppers often leave their garden bed relatives well behind. Better drainage comes on top of that, because wet feet stunt growth and invite disease, and potting soil takes a lot of that risk away. And because you can move the container into the sun whenever you like, or bring it to safety in a storm, you've got a flexibility that would be unthinkable in a bed. A single plant in a medium pot often gives you dozens of peppers over the season, and with remarkably little care. For such a compact footprint, that's a remarkable return. At number 10 comes a plant you'll want to lock up on purpose, and that's mint. Nobody really struggles to grow mint. The struggle is stopping it. And that's exactly why a container is often the best place in the world for this plant. In a bed, mint spreads through underground runners at breakneck speed, takes over the neighborhood, and shoves other vegetables aside. What starts as a little patch of herbs quickly becomes a hostile takeover of half the garden. A pot ends that drama instantly. Instead of fighting the mint, you simply give it its own kingdom where it can run wild without causing chaos. And in that kingdom, it hits its peak. It grows fast, bounces back from a cut in no time, and even forgives you when you forget about it for a while. A container by the kitchen door also means fresh mint is always within reach for tea, dessert, salads, and cool drinks. And because a pot drains better, Mint often develops healthier roots than it would in clammy, permanently wet garden soil. So a container actually makes mint stronger because it manages its surroundings and keeps the competition in check. That's exactly why so many experienced gardeners swear by a pot when it comes to mint. At number 9, we've got green onions, and they're among the most container-friendly plants on this whole list. Their compact roots let you plant them really densely in small vessels, so even a tiny balcony gives a surprising harvest. Then there's the convenience. Instead of walking to a distant bed for every handful of onions, your container green onions sit just a few steps from the kitchen. They like loose, nutrient-rich soil with good drainage, and that's exactly what potting mix gives them. They regrow quickly after cutting and can even be raised again from kitchen scraps, which is why they feel almost endless once they get going. An often overlooked benefit is cleanliness. Rain and muddy bed soil splash dirt onto the onion stalks, but a raised container keeps the plants clean and easier to harvest. And because green onions grow straight up, they get the most out of the smallest footprint, and a single rectangular balcony box easily holds dozens. For city gardeners and anyone short on space, container green onions become one of the most reliable crops there is. At number 8, the harvest almost turns into a treasure hunt, because now it's potatoes. In a container, growing potatoes gets simpler in nearly every way. In a bed, the harvest quickly becomes a sweaty digging job, and dig too eagerly with the fork and you stab straight into the tubers. A grow bag puts an end to that. You just tip the bag over and collect the potatoes straight out of the soil. And that's cleaner, easier, and honestly just more satisfying. Then there's pest protection. Potatoes in the ground are more prone to soil-borne diseases and pests that attack the developing tubers, and fresh soil in the bag lowers that risk a lot. Grow bags also drain water beautifully, which the potato loves, because soil that's too wet means rot. The mobility is handy too, since you can put the bag in the sunniest corner and even grow where classic gardening would be impossible. When you hill them up properly, potatoes basically grow upward, so you pull an amazing amount from a small footprint. Hardly any moment in the gardening year feels as good as tipping over a grow bag and watching dozens of tubers roll out. This is where it gets really good, because we are reaching the ones most people take up container gardening for in the first place. If the video's been useful so far, subscribe to the channel. There are small space garden tips like this here every week. And now on to number 7. At number 7, we have the cucumber. Cucumbers often struggle in a bed because the poor air around the leaves is the perfect breeding ground for mildew and fungus. A container fixes exactly that. When you train the cucumber straight up a trellis in a pot, the air circulation around the leaves improves enormously, and better air means healthier plants and fewer diseases all season, which is why container cucumbers frequently outpace their bed-grown relatives. Then there's the space saving, because the cucumber climbs up the trellis instead of crawling across half your beds, which makes it ideal for balconies, patios, and small yards. Harvesting gets easier too, because the fruit hangs clearly on the vine rather than hiding under a thicket of leaves on the ground. And they're cleaner on top of that, since a cucumber lying on damp soil quickly gets bruises or rots, while on the vine it stays up and healthy, because a pot warms faster in spring and you control the watering more precisely. The plant starts earlier and suffers less from swings in moisture. A single healthy cucumber in a container gives you a serious amount over the season. Once trellis, sun, and water are all in place, a lot of gardeners are honestly surprised how productive a vertically grown pot cucumber can get once air, light, and water line up. At number 6 comes the eggplant. Eggplants love warm soil above all, and that's exactly why they often grow better in a pot than in the ground. A classic bed warms up slowly in spring, especially in cooler regions, while a container heats up much faster and gives the eggplant the warm root climate it craves. That extra warmth leads to faster growth, earlier flowering, and often more fruit. Then there's drainage, because eggplants detest wet soil, and in a container, you've got the moisture far better under control. Healthy roots make healthy plants, and healthy plants carry more. The mobility is handy again, because eggplants need full sun, and a pot is easy to nudge towards the best light, which barely works with a fixed bed. And then there's the looks. Eggplants are surprisingly decorative with their violet flowers and glossy fruit, which makes them perfect for the patio and the ornamental pot. Despite that elegant appearance, they are tougher than most people expect. Once established, they handle heat really well and keep bearing through the hottest weeks of summer. So a single container eggplant in good conditions gives you harvest after harvest for months. At number 5, we have the cherry tomato. A lot of people fail with big beefsteak tomatoes and conclude that tomatoes and containers just don't mix. Cherry tomatoes flip that story completely, because many varieties actually carry better in a pot than in the ground. One reason is disease protection. In a bed, soil-borne fungi, splashing rainwater, and swinging moisture wear on tomatoes all season long. A container creates a much more controlled setting. Better drainage keeps the roots healthy, and the raised plant gets more air around its foliage, which matters because tomatoes are extremely prone to fungus in humid weather. Then there's the root advantage. Cherry tomatoes naturally carry smaller fruit and stress a container's root system less than giant beefsteaks, so the plant pours its energy into a steady harvest rather than a few heavy lumps. A single healthy plant gives you hundreds of small tomatoes over the season. And because they ripen gradually, the harvest turns into an ongoing reward rather than one big event. A simple tomato stake or a small cage in the pot keeps the plant upright and saves valuable space. For balconies, patios, and suburban yards, the container cherry tomato becomes one of the most productive crops of the whole year. And this next crop makes almost everything even simpler. At number 4 come the bush beans. Bush beans already have a reputation for being easy, but in a container they get even more efficient. Unlike pole beans, they stay compact and manageable, which makes them made for a pot. They don't need tall trellises or complicated supports. They just quietly grow into productive little plants that fill up with flowers and pods surprisingly fast. A big advantage, again, is warmth. Bush beans germinate and establish faster in warm soil, and a container heats up much earlier in spring than a bed, which often means an earlier harvest. And quick wins, as we know, make you want to keep going. It's cleaner too, because the pods hang above the potting soil and stay tidier and easier to pick after a downpour than beans tangled in the mud of a bed. Weed control is much simpler in a container as well, which counts because bush beans don't tolerate much root competition early on. And because they naturally grow in dense clusters, even a medium-sized pot gives a surprising harvest in the smallest area. Some gardeners are amazed how many meals come out of a few pots of bush beans, and with minimal effort all season. That reliable harvest in a small space is exactly what earns the bush bean its place on this list. We've reached the top 3, and at number 3 we're talking about spinach. A bed creates one big problem for spinach, and that's heat buildup. As soon as temperatures rise, spinach bolts in a flash, turns bitter, later and ends the harvest far sooner than you'd like. A container takes the edge off that because it's mobile. Instead of leaving spinach to roast in full sun on hot afternoons, you simply slide it into partial shade, and that freedom noticeably stretches the harvest window. Then there's pest protection. Spinach in the ground tends to draw slugs and soil insects that riddle the tender leaves, while a raised container slows a lot of those pests and keeps the leaves cleaner. Succession sowing runs pleasantly simple in a pot too, because once one batch is finished, the next follows without any big soil work. Another plus hardly anyone has on their radar is moisture control. Spinach likes it evenly damp but hates wet feed, and with good potting soil, you hold that balance far more easily than in unpredictable garden ground. And because spinach roots shallowly, even a modest vessel suits it. Sometimes all it takes is a pot, good soil, and the option to move the plant when the weather shifts. That way, you pull fresh spinach leaves from a container for weeks, while the one in the bed would have bolted long ago. At number 2 come the strawberries, and once you've grown them in a container, you rarely go back to a bed. The reason is easy to follow. In a bed, several problems wait for the strawberry at once. Slugs go after the fruit, rain splashes soil onto the berries, and wherever the fruit rests on damp ground, rot sets in. A container sweeps nearly all of that aside in one move. Raised berries stay cleaner, healthier, and easier to pick. Then there's pest protection, because when the strawberries aren't sitting on the ground, insects and animals have a harder time reaching the fruit before you do. It gets really comfortable with hanging baskets, strawberry towers, and balcony pots that bring the fruit to a nice picking height instead of forcing you into a constant crouch. Another benefit is runner control. Strawberries spread aggressively in a bed and quickly turn maintenance into a test of patience, while a container keeps the plants tidy and manageable and still bears well. And because strawberries love well-drained soil, a pot often gives them healthier root conditions than heavy garden ground. A few cleverly placed strawberry pots yield an astonishing amount of fruit in the tiniest space. That's exactly why container strawberries are so popular with city and suburban gardeners, that they're often the very first plant someone ever puts in a pot. And with that, we come to the crown of the list. Number 1, basil. If there's one edible plant that seems built for a container, it's this one. Basil positively thrives in the warm, controlled conditions of a pot. A bed often holds too much water around the roots, especially after heavy rain, and that's exactly what basil hates. Wet feet mean instant stress, disease, and stunted growth. A container solves that with its superior drainage and the faster warming of the soil. Warm roots make basil overjoyed, and happy basil turns wildly productive. Then there's the air. Good air circulation pushes fungus problems down and drives healthy leaf growth all season. What's especially nice is how easily basil harvests in a pot. Set the container next to the kitchen, and fresh leaves are always within reach for pasta, salad, pizza, and sauce. And the more often you harvest, the bushier and more productive the plant tends to get, which is why a single healthy basil plant supplies you with fresh herbs for months. So more often than not, a container is what truly unlocks a basil harvest. The biggest mistake in gardening is assuming a bigger garden automatically brings a better harvest. But smaller spaces often create the better conditions. Better drainage, better air, better soil, fewer weeds, fewer pests, and far more freedom. That's exactly why so many of these plants truly thrive in a container. You don't need acres of land to grow astonishing amounts of food. Sometimes a few well-placed pots beat a whole garden bed. And once you've seen how much a balcony, a patio, or a sunny corner really gives you, you'll look at those spots differently forever. Gardening isn't only about more space, it's about using the space you already have more wisely. If you've stuck with me this far, you'll probably try one of these plants in a pot this year. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss next week when I show you exactly which soil and which pot size these crops run best in. Until then, good luck out on your balcony.